There's a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm glad you joined. Hey, Lisa. Hello.
I got my tea up
Hi,
there.
guys. Thank you for helping. It can be so hard to navigate this, so it's totally understandable. Oh, God.
My own personal cheerleaders.
Honestly, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like the invite didn't work, but we got it figured out because you're here, so that's what matters.
Right.
So thank you so much. So I'm just gonna start off with like kind of introducing you, and then we can just kind of go into the questions if that works for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Perfect. So hello everyone, welcome to our live. Sorry for the little bit of the wait, but it was a wait worth waiting for. Today in our live today, I'll be interviewing Sarah Birch from Positive Living. Sarah Birch is actually the Women's Community Development Coordinator for Positive Living Niagara. And just like kind of a few things about this organization, basically Positive Living Niagara is a community-based organization that provides support to people living with HIV and for people who face greater systemic risk factors for HIV as well. So two of the big main principles for Positive Living is in our work is harm reduction and sex positivity. And at the heart of those principles is autonomy. So the organization themselves and the people who work there believe that individuals are experts in their own lives and provide services to support people in making those choices that make sense for their own lived realities. So autonomy is a huge part of that. And these principles also play a part on the spectrum of people who do sex work as well. So they also play a role in harm reduction as well as supporting sex workers in our region. More about Sarah herself is that she's very passionate about creating social change, and she's very passionate about women empowerment. And basically that's what led her to work with Positive Living Niagara as a women's community development coordinator. On top of that, she's been there for 20 years. And for 11 of those years, she's actually helped with a provincial strategy called the Women's HIV and AIDS Initiative, which is another organization in Canada. Basically what Sarah was able to do in her community is that she's able to work with the community to kind of address structural and societal factors that disproportionately affect or increase risk factors for HIV in certain groups of women. A lot of these factors include poverty, gender-based violence, racism, colonialism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and so many more other aspects. And these aspects also play a role in impacting sex workers' rights, especially their right for them to make choices about their physical, emotional, and mental and sexual health and wellness. So, a pretty long portfolio there, but in addition to her work in Positive Living, Sarah's also a wife and a mother of 3 children, and to keep her life interesting, to keep her going. And she's also the past president of Out Niagara, and she's very much excited to continue working with the vibrant 2S LGBTQIA community in Niagara as well as time goes on. So we see her fans in the comments, so love that for everyone here. So thank you so much once again for being with us today. So just a first question that was posed by a few students. Basically, in reading your bio, that was also in the questionnaire. Pretty much, people are just asking what inspired you to get involved with helping your community.
Just in general, or just
Yeah, just in general. Like, what inspired you to get into your role, your current role?
To be perfectly honest, I never imagined myself here. So
True.
I always had a passion for working with women, and that's something I always knew that I wanted to do. And Positive Living was actually a first-year student placement, and I fell in love with the philosophy and just that approach to meeting people where they are. That's something I think we're seeing a little bit more common nowadays, but when I started 20 years ago, I think it was very, very different, the landscape, in terms of really being able to sit with people and meet them where they are, wherever they are on their journey. And I just connected so much with that philosophy. And so I've had the opportunity to meet people that I never imagined I would be able to meet. So many amazing, phenomenal people that have taught me and helped me to grow so much along the way, which I'm very, very grateful for.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So this is kind of going to be more pertaining to the type of work that is done with Positive Living and pertaining to sex workers. So through your work and the Positive Living organization, in what way are you supporting and advocating for sex workers in the Niagara region?
So, I mean, in a variety of ways, and some of that, a lot of it is directly, and some of it is indirectly. So, again, in terms of, as an organization, the type of services we offer are harm reduction based services. And so that's meeting people wherever they are in terms of their needs. Specifically, because we are an HIV service organization, we do obviously provide different services to prevent new cases of HIV and to support people living with HIV. And I want to sort of put it out there right now. I have to admit, I had a little bit of interpretation about, you know, being part of this. I think this is an amazing campaign. I love what you're doing. And these conversations need to happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But also was a little concerned that my presence as part of this campaign, because there is so much stigma attached to sex work, and a lot of it is, I think I had mentioned it to you earlier in an email, oddly enough, as I was like preparing for today. We were doing a community event, we do a coffee outside event, and somebody came up to me and sort of said, you know, oh yeah, unfortunately I've never had an STI because I don't sleep with sex workers. And I'm like, oh. So, okay, time to do a little education here. Because that is a common misconception that we see a lot, and that's not the first time I've heard that. So really educating people about some of those, particularly in my role, and the part that I enjoy the most is really having those conversations either on an individual level or on a community level, is talking about those structural barriers that prevent people from being able to make those choices for themselves. So it's not that people have don't have the knowledge or intelligence to make these choices. It's barriers that prevent people from really being able to have access to choice. And so I think that's probably the largest part of my role, and even our role as an organization, is providing access to choice that makes sense for the individual.
Exactly. And definitely with the type of work that you guys do, and people to understand the type of people you support, that understanding is rooted in empathy as well. So as long as you're empathetic and understanding, then you'll be able to understand the type of people that you're supporting. So that's very good. So there are people who believe that criminalizing substance use and sex work as a way to deter people from engaging in these activities. There are people who also believe that it is a waste of money to kind of fund consumption sites or fund organizations that support sex workers. And on that note, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions of your organization? So given that your principles are non-judgment and sex positive principles, what do you think are those biggest misconceptions that people would place on you guys?
So I think that, I mean, again, and we've heard all that before, that providing harm reduction services promotes promiscuity, promotes substance use, and plenty of studies, and there are plenty of examples out there showing that actually the complete opposite is true. Even in talking to parents and helping them guide them through the conversation, there's that misconception that talking about sex is going to mean kids are going to go out there and talk about sex. But the reality is, not talking about sex means you're missing out on an opportunity to have healthy conversations about sex and sexuality. And that's the same thing with talking about sex work or just talking about substance use. Is not providing space to have these conversations means that those conversations that need to happen aren't happening. So people aren't connecting with the resources they need, or unfortunately, I mean, the internet can be a really good resource of information, but it can also be a really bad resource of information. But to really be able to connect with people is so important, and being able to provide a space for those conversations to happen. And so much emphasis is often put on, you know, if you want to get help, you need to stop doing X behavior. So we're only gonna help you if you're planning to exit sex work. We're only gonna help you if you plan to stop using substances. So we're not helping people. We're not meeting people where they are when we do that, and it's isolating people, and it's preventing people from getting the support that they need. People who do want to exit, for whatever reason that is, if they want to exit, if they don't have a place to go, if they don't have anybody to talk to about that and don't know what their options are, I mean, it can be a really difficult process. I, had watched the interview with Delta Dawn yesterday, which by the way was hugely amazing. And if you have not watched it, please go watch it because it's amazing.
Yes.
And a tough act to follow, I might add.
Okay. You're doing great.
But it just, and she spoke eloquently about, what do I put on a resume?
Right.
So, very simple things like that, because we don't recognize the expertise of individuals. We don't recognize their strengths. And, we don't see people as people. So I think that's the most important thing about what harm reduction does, is it sees people as people.
Yeah. And that's the most important thing. Yeah. So here's another question that was posed by a student. So what do you think the rest of the community, so that's basically schools, parents, universities, even city council, anybody, what can they do to support sex workers or be able to just kind of support your work as well?
First of all, start by looking inwards and challenge your own beliefs and bias.
Yeah.
Again, in 20 years of work, I encounter I've been fortunate that people will share things with me that they wouldn't otherwise have shared with me. And in particular, when it comes to sex work, I have met people with vastly different experiences. So people who this is their chosen career, they love what they do, they feel empowered by what they do. I've met people who, well, it's not their forever job, but it's good money right now and it's paying for school. And other people who were, circumstances, and in some cases were coerced into it, and it was not a positive experience for them. So being able to hear those stories and not only listen to the ones that support your own bias, I think is like the most important thing. I think especially as service providers in particular, it's really important we get a bit of a skewed view of sex work, because people don't walk through our doors when everything's going great.
Yeah.
So I literally in 20 years have never had somebody walk through the door and just kind of say, hey, everything's good, living my best life, just wanted to let you know. So that's literally never happened. I mean, it would be great, and I welcome anybody if they just want to come in and say, hey, living my best life, doing great. But we're happy, anybody here would be happy to celebrate those wins with you. But that's just not the reality of our work. And I think we tend to get caught up in this whole notion that people are victims, or people don't have the capacity. So even those who are going through challenges still have a strength, and we need to acknowledge those strengths. So again, start with challenging your own biases and listening to the stories that may come in conflict with some of your preconceived ideas, because all of the stories will be different and all of them will be true. And some people have a really hard time believing that all of these different experiences can all be so different and true at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So I'm just going to pose another question that was placed by a student. Sorry, just kind of going through the list. So I know you kind of mentioned this earlier when it came to kind of adopting the more non-judgmental, sex positive attitudes instead of exit strategies. And I know that for some people, it's kind of hard to grasp that concept of kind of helping people exits. Well, it sounds like you don't, but just kind of adopting those strategies alone. So why aren't exit strategies used in your sex work program, or why aren't they like emphasized in that sense?
It's not so much that they're not emphasized. If again, it's done on an individual basis. So, and again, sort of the whole point of being, those principles of harm reduction and being sex positive is about you know, the individual, not lumping them in with a group of people and assuming that we know what's best for them. Again, you already said it in like the opening. It's about acknowledging that people are the experts in their own lives.
Yeah.
So if someone were to come to me and say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me, I want to, and exit, just to be clear, exit doesn't necessarily mean, and this is the other piece of about harm reduction, is that's also a spectrum. It might be, so I'm working as an escort right now, it's not working for me anymore, I think I'd like to, you know, move things online. You know, which again, for a variety of reasons, people's situations change. And so their ideas and their choices might change. And again, it's about what does, so people enter into sex work for a variety of reasons. So their reasons for exiting also varies. So it's again about not making those assumptions and not telling people what they need.
100%. So I know that you guys also interact with the government in that sense. I know that you kind of worked on like a provincial strategy and stuff like that. And so for students, another student was actually kind of wondering, what do you think the government can do to not only help sex workers, but also help organizations that support sex workers as well? What do you think the government should do, or yeah, what should they do to support you guys and sex workers?
Listen to sex workers, acknowledge their expertise. Like,
Yeah.
and all, again, all levels of, you're going to hear a variety of different voices and a lot of different opinions. And again, they're all true and because it comes from the individual perspective of that individual, but you need to take all of those things into consideration. Again, Delta Dawn did an amazing, so again, watch your video. But I talked about, you know, some of the criminalized aspects of sex work where, you know, it's, sex work itself isn't being criminalized. However, purchasing sex is criminalized. So, and how that creates, the potential for violence, makes things unsafe, forces sex workers to make choices. They have to focus on protecting their clients rather than their own personal safety. So, you know, address bad laws, basically.
Yeah. 100%. And people, I know we've got studies, people have been finding that when you associate sometimes like human sex trafficking with sex work and criminalizing sex work itself, it actually makes it more dangerous in that sense. So that's what a lot of studies have shown. So that's why it's important to have sex workers and people have lived experience in these spaces so they can be able to formulate better policies. So that's very true.
Yeah, and in terms of, because I've heard people using, you know, sex worker and trafficking interchangeably.
Yeah.
Those are two very different things. Trafficking is a very serious crime. And even in talking to some sex workers, I've heard them express, you know, a desire to be able to support the work around human trafficking. And some of them are in a great position to be able to do that and actually help people. But again, their skills and their knowledge are not being recognized. So, and some of these conversations we're having are actually not helping people who are being trafficked either. And also trafficking is not just limited to sex work.
Exactly. It's good. We have to make those clarifications a lot. They just always get mixed up. So thank you for clarifying that. So this is another one too. So why do you think it is hard for people to believe that sex workers can be regular, everyday people, people that work at the grocery store, people who are students? You know, why is that so difficult for people to acknowledge? Or why do you think it's difficult for people?
More my personal opinion, but just people. I don't know if this is strictly a North America thing. I mean, we're weird about sex in general. We're weird about it. And that's what I always find, even just in my work and trying to engage. When people ask me what my job is, I tell them it's inserting myself into places to talk about things that nobody wants to talk about, and sex being one of them. So, and I find it odd that we're surrounded by sex. Turn on the TV, read an ad, like we're surrounded by images of sex. We're surrounded by messages of sex. You know, corporations use sex to sell products because sex sells. And yet
Yeah.
we're not willing to have these, the minute I try to engage people in healthy conversations about sex, that's where they draw the line. That's where it's like, oh no, we're not gonna have that conversation. And it's just weird that we can, you know, we can see all of these images about sex and sometimes some pretty unhealthy ones, and we're okay with that, but engaging anybody in any kind of sex positive conversation is just that's someplace people as a society we're not willing to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that for sure. I've seen that all my life. I don't know. I mean, it's changing slowly but surely, thanks to sex workers and activists, you know, bringing these conversations to light. But it's very slow. But I have faith that it's going to get better in the future. So, yeah, it's just that makes a lot of sense as to why people just can't make that connection.
Yeah, in sex workers, in my experience, I've encountered some of the best sexual health educators out there are sex workers, whether it's going out into community and advocating or one-on-one with their clients. So again, those skills need to be recognized because it's valuable.
Yep. I agree. Long overdue. So, what is your advice for people who don't have lived experience as sex workers, but maybe want to work in sex work support and advocacy? What kind of advice would you have for people who want to get involved in that kind of work?
I know I'm going to be repeating myself, but listen. Listen. I think if that is not, and again, I should clarify this from the beginning. I do not have any experience personally as a sex worker. So I'm speaking as somebody who is a service provider, and much of my education has been from sex workers themselves. They are the ones who have to navigate this very difficult industry. And the best thing for me to do is to sit, listen, and again, take in what is being said, challenge your own personal biases, connect with organizations that identify as being sex positive. Ideally, you know, organizations should be sex worker led. Sometimes that is a difficult thing because it is very difficult for people to talk openly because of so much stigma surrounding sex work. But also you can do it in your daily life. You can challenge people who, you know, tell that off-color joke. You know, I mean, don't laugh for starters, but also challenge them and explain to them why that's not appropriate. And people make offhand comments all the time, not realizing how that impacts how community views sex workers, but also sex workers themselves. Sometimes they hear these messages and it becomes internalized, which again makes it more difficult. So you don't have to, you know, be out there attending meetings, attending protests or rallies. It can be something as simple in your daily life at the dinner table, challenging. My family loves it when I do this. I'm great fun at parties.
Me too. Me too.
So,
No, me too. You have to not call them out, but just tell them. Yeah, just tell them like, yeah, that's not okay. But, yeah, just like nicely, but it's good. Yeah, I feel that. So, so these are just the last few questions. So, with 20 years of experience working in community development as a women development coordinator, Niagara president, and working with the Women's HIV and AIDS Initiative, what are some goals? Do you have any more goals that you want to achieve in the community, or any other projects that you guys intend to work on? Anything like that?
Oh my goodness, that's a huge question. So many things. Okay, pie in the sky dream. You know, I definitely would love to see more spaces for sex workers to be able to, again, speak on their own behalf. You know, I appreciate appreciate the opportunity to be able to sit and speak with you today, but hopefully this time next year, you'll have a whole week of people talking about their experience and diverse experiences. So in any way I can support that, I gladly would do that. And just in terms of, I know here at Positive Living Niagara, we have been, because especially during COVID, there has been, and we're aware that of a lot of the violence that especially the more street involved sex workers have been facing, but just overall in terms of violence against women during COVID. So we've been working with people with lived experience to address that and try to help develop, you know, safety planning and reporting for sex workers within our own organization, so that we as an organization can better support that. And that's something that we're hoping to be able to also connect with other community partners that we work with that also provide support and services. And again, people with lived experience have been at the heart of creating that program, because it's challenging when things happen, whether it's assault or rape. Oftentimes there's a lot of shame and blame that is put on sex workers, as opposed to holding the individuals accountable. So, or also just even the ability to be able to report, because they're not believed, or not seen as credible witnesses. So that's something that we're in the process of working with community partners as well to ensure that people feel safe, and that if they do need that kind of support, they can get that kind of support.
Awesome, thank you. And lastly, what message do you have for people that might not believe that sex work is empowering, or kind of support limiting it in that sense? What kind of message do you have for those people?
Again, I know I've already said it, but sit back and listen. I mean, again, I'm going to plug Delta Dawn's video again, just because it was so amazing. But if you have any doubt, I've had so many people, you know, who can articulate exactly why they do what they do and why they love what they do. And this notion that, you know, they're just being misled, or it's being misrepresented. People, they can tell you better than I could why they love what they do. And again, I mean, practical things like money, but also that power of deciding, you know, how you're going to use your body. And I think again, Delta said it best. you can't be a feminist and not support sex work.
Yeah.
So.
Well said. Well said. Well said. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming here. Thank you. I wanted to be able to have a lot of perspectives for people, because sex work advocacy involves a lot of players and a lot of people involved. Obviously, sex workers, people with lived experience as sex workers, and even the collaborations that they make with community providers and organizations. So I'm really thankful for, at least I am thankful for having Delta Dawn's perspective. I'm thankful for having your perspective as well, speaking from somebody who maybe might not have lived experience, but you're able to, you know, speak from the sense of how it is to support them and kind of, you know, let them be able to take charge in what works best for sex workers. So I'm thankful for at least having you provide your perspective, and especially with your experience with positive living and women empowerment. So I'm really thankful that you're here, and I'm very thankful that you're able to answer these questions posed by the students. So thank you guys so much, and thank you everyone for joining the live today. Sarah, if you have anything you want to add, but anything, just more so thank you for being here. So.
Thank you for this opportunity. This is great. And again, I hope there are more discussions, because I hope this is just the beginning, because there needs to be more platforms to be able to have healthy conversations like this. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much. All right. Have a nice day. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.